To my channel Inch by Inch Art. I'm going to be showing you today how I made the creature from the Flea Mortals MCDM monster book that's coming out from Kickstarter, the Lightbender. I'm going to be starting out by just making the base. This should be pretty quick and easy. It's just going to be a rock. I'm using tinfoil as my armature, and I've cut out a piece of cardboard just so that I have a reference for the scale. I can admit that I should have paid more attention to my base in the scale of this creature, because it ends up becoming more of a miniature sculpture rather than a true mini, because the size I end up with at the end is really more of a huge creature, where the Lightbender is a large creature per the MCDM stats. So I'm just using some Super Sculpey to make the base and using the tin foil and a few other items to help texture my little rock outcropping. This is just a piece of shell I found at the beach. I thought it had a really cool texture, so I figured I would use that to help as sort of a texture stamp on my rocks. And you can see I just did one large piece of clay over the tin foil and then used some smaller balls of clay to sort of make extra rocks and boulders on top. But I decided that the one piece was too big as like a solid lump and I wanted to break it up more. So I used my angled silicone sculpting tool to press more lines and cracks and separation between what should be rocks and boulders. So my base is finished and I'm now moving on to actually making the Lightbender itself, again using tinfoil as my armature and then Super Sculpey on top. I'm going to be baking the Super Sculpey on the tinfoil as a armature. So the very core of the body will be hard, but everything else I'm going to make out of CosClay, because this creature has a lot of very fine, thin features. It has some really cool tails with spikes and it's got horns and a crazy frilly mane that I thought would be great to use CosClay for, to see how the flexibility works for a miniature. Here you can see I'm twisting up some wire to make an armature for the head. Just twist the base and then press it into the clay. And now I'm starting to make an armature for the twin tails. I'm estimating about how long I want the tails to be and how much of the inside of the tails should be a wire armature. And then I'm twisting the end using a needle tool to poke a hole where I'm going to insert the tail and just pressing it in. I then go in with my silicone sculpting tools and a little bit more Super Sculpey to add more mass around the base and help hold that in. You could also use liquid Sculpey if you want to secure it inside, but I thought that this was sufficient because it's pretty long that it goes inside the armature. And here I am just testing again the size. Here I am just using a metal edge tool to sort of rough up the polymer clay. The intention for this was the CosClay would have something to grip to. And now I'm just starting to warm up and soften the CosClay with my fingers. I did notice that CosClay is very malleable once it's been warmed, even a tiny bit, much more so than Super Sculpey. So I just cover the entire armature with a thin skin of the CosClay, and then I start to press in the details of where muscles will be and some of the features of the creature from the illustration that was shared for Kickstarter. I'm really excited for it to come out. I don't know if they'll be making an official mini for this, maybe they will, but I thought this would be an interesting project for a bit of fan art for MCDM's product, something I really enjoyed and backed. I have also backed some other Kickstarters of theirs, like Kingdoms in Warfare, which we've tried out and was quite fun. And as you can see, I'm adding clay to bulk up the muscle and add the limbs and paws. I didn't track every single time that I baked this piece, but I did bake it quite a few times, and one of the things that impressed me the most about the CosClay is it was very easy to just keep putting it into the oven and baking it over and over. The color never changed like it can do with especially Super Sculpey beige or neutral. Super Sculpey tends to get weird spots I'll see on it a lot. This didn't do that at all. It didn't discolor. It was still flexible every single time. It didn't seem to get less flexible with each bake or anything like that. So it's really promising and pretty cool, and I'm curious to see if these minis will last longer than my others. Now I'm ready to add the head. I just put a ball of the CosClay on the little armature loop that I had sticking out for where the head should go, and then I start to build it up with more and more pieces of CosClay and press in details with my silicone sculpting tool, my needle tool, and my fingers. I didn't like how its muzzle was turning out, so I decided to press it in a little bit, add a bit more clay, and redo the nose. The little fine needle tool works great for a very small detail when you're sculpting minis. If I were to do this again, I probably would have looked at more cat anatomy, but this creature's a little odd in that it's sort of like, I guess like a dragon cat, kind of, because it's got loads of scales and spikes and plates all over. I mean, the tails are very, almost scorpion-like, but the head is very much supposed to be like, well, at least I believe it's supposed to look like a large cat. So I probably should have looked at some to help me with the shape of the head and the pose of the expression that it's making. But instead I just used the one reference image that was on the Kickstarter and did my best to have an interpretation of it. It's not exact, and I'm okay with that. Here you can see I'm testing the teeth and pressing on them. They flex and stay right where they are. Unfortunately, I lost the video of making the feet, but essentially I used the feet to just sculpt it directly onto the base. Here I am adding the tails. The tails were really tricky to do. This is part of why I did bake before I got to this part, just because I knew I'd be touching it all over and I didn't want to mess up something on the face or the body that I had finished when I was trying to work on these tails. They're extremely uniquely shaped from what I could tell in the images. It's almost like they're somewhat flat and kind of like bladed, but there's two of them and they have a ton of spikes up at the end. They're very unique tails. I thought they were pretty cool, and I love that they're flexible and even posable because I have the wire on the inside. If I flex it far enough and sort of bend it so that the internal wire is bending, the CosClay flexes with it, which is really, really cool. It isn't as flexible as, say, something that's actually hinged, so I can only pose it within a certain amount of reason. At least I think so. I haven't tried to more extremely bend it, but I have definitely pushed it around a lot, and it isn't cracking or breaking, so far so good. I really enjoyed the look of all the spikes and details on this creature. The artist did a really good job. So this creature is intended to be a companion for the Beastmaster, which I think is really awesome, especially if you like cats. So here I'm starting to make the crazy mane part. I thought it would be easier if I made them separately off of the piece and then put them on. So I just started to make them and put them off to the side. Then I'm moving on to adding hair. I didn't video putting some of the hair in other places, like how I hadn't videoed making the feet. I had done all the other fur that's already been finished on the model at that point, so I'm just showing you real quick how I did the fluffy bottom that it randomly has. I'm not sure why they decided to give it all this hair when it seems like it's more scaled and spiky and stuff. It seems like an interesting choice to me, but it's cute, so whatever. So I basically just put on some worms of clay and point them at the ends, and then I take the silicone sculpting tool to start to pull it and make it look a little bit more hair-like it has like chunks of hair. And then I take the needle tool and I start to make actual lines to give it that individual hair effect. And then I add much smaller worms of clay on top and use my needle tool to give it that fluffy movement. Here you can see I've covered his whole bottom in fur. Now onto the ears. This creature has really, really cool, crazy, like cat monster ears that I really enjoyed. I liked how big and long and pointy they were. So once I've got my ears done, I'm going to start doing this crazy mane. And I'm just using my silicone sculpting tools to press them into the neck and head. I didn't use any liquid Sculpey at all in this entire piece. I just used the CosClay and I pressed it in really well and tried to blend it in really well to anything that had been cured previously, and so far so good. No problems. I finished this piece a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago now, and I've moved these main pieces and everything that's sticking out from the main body I have manipulated and pushed in different directions and had no problems at all, so it's been a really great experience playing with CosClay. And now I'm adding, I guess they're kind of antlers, I'm not sure. Again, just referencing the art from the Kickstarter, and that will be in the book. It has these parts at the very top of these main fins that sort of morph into these little antler parts, and then you'll see later how I handle the reflective sun part in the middle to explain. So here you can see is the final time I've baked it and how flexible it all is. And now I've pulled out my reference square from the beginning and realized that nope, I made this thing quite large for a large creature, and yeah, I'm still gonna finish it. Maybe I'll use it in a game, I don't know. These are like Angelina film. I don't know if anyone's heard of those before, but this is actually a nail decoration kit, but it had some little flecks that I thought would be really good to use on this. This is some mica powder used in a variety of resins. I'm using a new paint. It's a acrylic paint made by Rustoleum. It's just a craft acrylic, but it is quite glossy and very thin and liquid. So I'm using that acrylic paint as essentially a base coat, and it took about 3 coats of this to get full coverage of the white, letting it dry in between each layer. Now I'm using the Golden Fluid Acrylics Iridescent Pearl paint. This is just to start to make it more shiny and iridescent rather than just white. I just put 1 good thick coat of this all over it. Now I'm going into my mica powders. I have a couple of different ones that I use on it. And now I'm going to be using my E6000 glue to do something you may not have expected that I thought would be a little bit creative and add some interest to the piece. I decided that the whole back of the head where the mane was actually going to be made up of these. And I sort of thought about it like, in the depiction, I feel like the creature is using its ability, but that maybe all the time its mane isn't sticking out the way that it is, and it actually folds back on its head. So underneath are these different, I don't know if they're hairs or just a different material that is very reflective and opalescent. It was just an artistic choice. I hope you liked it. Just painting the nose and mouth. I do go back and make a pink for the nose in particular because it's very pink. In its ears as well, I painted, but I forgot to film it. Here I'm just making a little gem out of some cheap dollar store gems that I found. You'll see what I do with this later. I'm going to show you how I very carefully put on washes. I do this with all of my minis, but I have a really hard time videoing it usually. But thanks to this piece ending up so large, it was much easier to show you how I do this. It's just a black acrylic paint that I've watered down very heavily. I take the thinnest, smallest brush I have, and I very strategically apply it only in areas that I want shading. I do this on creatures that are not monstrous, so like not dark and gritty looking, or in creatures that I only want to highlight certain features and details. So like with this one, I want it to be very light, and it is white, and I'm trying to keep that. So I just place the black wash in the detailed areas that I want to make pop, but I don't just slather it all over the entire thing because it would make it muddied and dark. So now I'm doing a bit of recycling. I had also backed another ttrpg Kickstarter, which was called Skinny Minis. This is the popped out miniature characters. It's just a thin acrylic clear material. I'm just going to use some pliers to snap off a little pointed part of it. Here's that little gem that I showed you before that I've stuck one to each side of itself to make it look like a circle. So you can see in the art it's depicted that it's basically radiating light from above its head, so I decided that I wanted it to have that. I'm just using E6000 glue to stick this down and glue the gem to the little spike, and then I'm using UV resin to secure it more permanently. I hope you enjoyed that, my little piece of fan art for the Flea Mortals MCDM Kickstarter book that's going to be coming out. I can't wait to use this creature in a game. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you'd like to see more of me making my art, please like, follow, and subscribe.